Let me just correct something that you said for the audience because I want to be really clear. That is not how large language models work. Hey there, writer, and welcome back to the Novelist Studio. I am your host, Anna Del Valle, and I am so excited for today's guest. I have JD Barker on the show, and he is an internationally best-selling author. His work includes the Fourth Monkey series, co-authoring projects with icons such as James Patterson, and collaborations tied to the literary estate of Bram Stoker. And that's such a cool story. I'm gonna have JD talk about that. And he is also a sought after industry mentor, offering candid insights into writing craft, publishing strategy, and the business realities behind a successful author career, which JD, you have really had a very impressive author career. Can you just start telling us about this Bram Stoker? I thought that was such a great story. How did you get to work on that?
Yeah, so that one. So I've actually been in the industry for a very long time. I did about 20 years working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter. So basically, writing on other people's projects before I started writing my own titles. I ended up with 6 different books that hit the New York Times list that all came out with other people's names on the cover that I had written. So that's kind of what spurred me on to start writing my own stuff. But I wrote my debut novel in 2014. It was called Forsaken, and it was up for the Bram Stoker Award for Best Debut Horror Novel. And while I was at the conference to accept the award, I ran into Dacre Stoker, who's Bram's great-grandnephew. We ended up sitting next to each other at a signing, for about an hour or so, and I picked his brain on everything related to Bram, and he asked me a lot of questions about my background as a ghostwriter and a book doctor. And I thought we were just having a conversation, but he pulled me aside the next day and confessed that it was basically a job interview. He said his family had been trying to find somebody to write a prequel to Dracula for a very long time, my background was basically what they were looking for. They liked my writing style. They liked the fact that I had done this sort of thing before. So they asked if I'd be interested in doing it. And the answer to that was yes. You always say yes when somebody asks you to write a prequel to Dracula.
Yeah.
And it was a crazy fun project. I mean, we ended up meeting a couple of times, and at one point he brought out this big old trunk, and it was literally everything that Bram had on his desk when he wrote the original novel. So we got to pick through all of Bram Stoker's notes, his journals, diary entries, notes left by his family. It was a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, that in and of itself could be a book. That's such a great story.
It was crazy. I mean, that's one of my all-time favorite books. It's what I consider to be the first adult book that I ever read. I picked up a copy when I was 8 years old at a yard sale for 25 cents. I didn't think my mom would let me buy it, but she did, and I took it home and read it, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I slept with the lights on for like 2-3 weeks, checked under my bed, closed the closet door. But it's the first time a book had ever gotten like an emotional reaction out of me. And I think that's what really made me want to become a writer. I've been chasing that feeling as a reader and a writer ever since.
Yeah, that is very cool. I'm going to have a lot of questions for you about just being a writer, and you basically have the life that many writers, aspiring writers, have, right? So I'm going to ask you some questions. Is it true that this and that and the other? But for the guests listening, I also want the audience to know that we're going to be talking about AI, and we're going to be asking JD questions about that. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation from many angles. So before we dive into our AI conversation, which is, basically really has revolutionized creative writing in the last 3 years, and there's many people against it, people for it, people still not sure what to do with it. But before we jump into all of that, let me ask you a question about being a writer. So you have been a professional writer for many years. Like, would you say your entire life?
Kind of. I grew up without a TV in the house, so we were reading at a really early age. I started reading around 3, and I had read like all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews by the time I got into kindergarten. I had a sister who was 15 months younger than me, so I used to write up stories and staple them, and I created like a little library in my room, and she would check them out, and I would charge her late fees, and that's kind of where the whole thing started for me. But my parents always, they told me writing is a fantastic hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a real job. And they drilled that into my head, so I did what I was expected to do. I went off to college college. I got a couple of degrees, and I ended up working in finance. But
Uh-huh.
I would come home and I would write, basically to stay sane. So at first I was just writing for myself. Back in college, I wrote for a lot of newspapers and magazines, which just kind of got me into the publishing world. And I stumbled into this, more or less a side hustle as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, basically helping other people fine tune their books and get them ready for publication.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, it was for other authors, then I got hired by agents, and I got hired by editors in New York. And I did that, at night while I was working the 60 to 80 hours a week. As my last job, I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as
Mm-hmm.
it sounds. But yeah, so I just, I didn't try to become a full-time author because I didn't think, I could, because my parents basically told me, doesn't happen. I had mentioned earlier, I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times list, and that was kind of the catalyst for me. That
Mm-hmm.
6th one hit around 2012, and my wife pulled me aside and she said, listen, I know you want to become a full-time author. Let's figure out a way to make this happen. But we were kind of stuck at that point because I had a really good job. I had a big salary. We had, the
Yeah.
trappings of that. We had a big house. We had cars. We had a boat.
Insurance, the whole
Yeah,
thing.
so
Yeah.
we couldn't just walk away from the monthly
Mm-hmm.
nut. It was just too expensive. So she came up with this crazy plan. We sold everything that we owned. We bought a tiny little duplex in Pittsburgh, rented out one side to some tenants, and we moved into the other side and basically got our expenses down to nothing, so that I could live off of savings long enough to write that first book. And that was 2013. The book came out in 2014, and I hit the ground running and haven't stopped since.
Wow, that's so crazy. So those 6 books that hit the New York Times bestselling. Okay, so basically you started getting gigs as a ghost writer for folks. How did that even happen? How did you get that opportunity?
Yeah, so when I was in college, I worked for RCA Records and BMG Distribution. I was essentially a
Uh-huh.
glorified babysitter. So if they had a recording artist come into South Florida, I'd have to pick them up and get them to the airport, get them to the radio stations for their interviews, get them to their hotel. If you ever saw the movie Get Them to the Greek, that was essentially my life. But I was,
Mm,
in college at the time, which was expensive, and I realized I've
mhm,
got some very famous people trapped in a car with me, sometimes for a week at a time. So I started to interview them, and I took those interviews and sold them to magazines like 17 and Teen People and Tiger Beat. And
mhm,
that's kind of how I broke into the industry, because when you write for newspapers and magazines, everybody that you work with has a novel at some stage of development. It's in a desk drawer somewhere. It's 400,000 words
mm,
long. They've been working on it for 10 years. It's almost done, but it needs a little something. I was the guy they would give those to. And initially, I
mhm,
just gave them feedback on, like grammatical things and punctuation and stuff. But it turned into, more, I kind of delved into like developmental edits and helped them fine tune the story.
mhm,
And I just, I was good at it, so the word of mouth just kind of spread, and project after project sort of dropped into my lap.
mhm,
So at one point I would get hired by, like an editor in New York. Like they would buy a debut novel from somebody, and it was good, but it needed some work. And a lot of times with a debut author, they can't always make the changes they need to make.
mhm,
Sometimes they're very bad at dialogue. Sometimes they overwrite. They would try to communicate that, but, a debut may not know how to do that. So they would bring me in as a hired gun, basically give me this
mhm.
direction. This is what the book needs. This is what it's missing. And, I would just fine tune it and get it ready to go. So, and I did that, for 2 decades.
Wow. So basically you were, I mean, I guess you could say that you were like a step up from a developmental editor because you were really kind of rolling up to your sleeves and maybe working 20, 30% of the book.
Yeah, I did the
Uh-huh.
the work for them. I basically
Uh-huh.
handed them a finished product. But I think that's honestly where I learned to write, because I had
Uh-huh.
editors and agents, the people in New York that are actually buying these books, telling
Mhm.
me exactly what they wanted that book to be, what they needed to see in order to get to the bestseller list. And
Uh-huh.
if you hear that enough, you hear it over and over again. Like that was incredible training for me.
Uh-huh. No, this is really, this is a great segue to our AI conversation. First of all, I think it's super interesting for the audience to hear that even books that get acquired by the big five or, the New York publishers, they still need work. And
Oh yeah.
especially, I mean, if they're a debut author, I work with a lot of aspiring writers in my academy, and a lot of people have said to me, Anna, I'm never going to be as good as, and then they're comparing themselves to the finished product. And I always say, you can't do that because these books go through another layer of tightening the story, the conflict, whatever, the dialogue. And so when it first lands and it gets acquired, it's not perfect. So
No.
yeah. That's
It's
awesome.
one of those things. I mean, I saw it firsthand, and I've published both as an indie and on the traditional side. I've had
Uh-huh.
plenty of traditional deals. I think the traditional deal is important for every author. I think they should shoot for it simply because they
Mm-hmm.
go through that process. You know, an
Mm-hmm.
agent tears apart their book, tells them everything they need to fix. If it gets acquired, the editor goes through it. Marketing people will sometimes weigh in. The copy editors, all these different people. And when you hear
Mm-hmm.
that enough, you basically, that's where you learn. You fine tune your own writing, and your next book is that much better for it. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
indie authors, unfortunately, aren't exposed to that. They write the book, they publish the book, they write the next book, they publish that book. All of their books might have one particular problem that they never fix because they don't even understand that it's a problem. And that's
Mm-hmm.
honestly what holds them back. I think every author needs to have somebody critical going through their work and helping them get to that next level. And everybody's always learning. I've got friends that have
Mm-hmm.
been in this business that are on the top of the New York Times list with every novel that comes out. They're still learning new things with every book. I think that the day you
Mm-hmm.
stop learning is the day you retire.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, it's an evolving um, skill, just like being a musician or painting or whatever. So I want to kind of shift the conversation a little bit to AI. Well, and then I'll come back because I really want to ask you more questions, more personal questions about being a writer. But so, AI made it on the scene. ChatGPT made it on the scene November 30th, 2022. It's been in the hands of consumers for 3 years now, almost. And it has really revolutionized writing for many reasons, right? Like a lot of people started writing novels with AI, which neither you agree with nor I agree with, because that's just prompting the AI to write chapters for you or to write a book for you. You're not a writer, you're prompt engineering, right? You're just asking what's next. And I think it's really funny also because just because you can interact with a large language model like ChatGPT or Claude and ask them to do something and then they deliver this to you, it doesn't mean that you understand craft or you understand structure. And you, JD, have worked with James Patterson and you've written a lot of great books yourself. And you know that structure, when you're structuring a book, that's one of the most, or, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I imagine that structure uh, is one of the key components that you really focus on when you start developing a new story that you're going to write.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
I've got a bunch of books behind me. There's only two that are actually on the craft of writing. One of them is Strunk and White, which gives you like all the grammatical rules that you need to know. The
Uh-huh.
other one is On Writing by Stephen King. And one of the things
Uh-huh.
that King points out in his book is, he's a full-on pantser, which I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
your audience knows that term.
Mm-hmm.
He creates his characters, his plot. He drops them in the middle of some crazy scenario and just kind of lets them tell him the story. And he gets to
Mm-hmm.
the finish line eventually. And I wrote my first couple of books that way, thinking that was the way that it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
When Patterson first called me, and we had talked about writing together, we had lunch, and he is a notorious outliner. That structure is extremely important to him. I had never done that before, so we didn't think we'd be able to work together. We left that lunch meeting, basically
Mm-hmm.
as friends, but I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. He called me a couple months later and said, "You know what? Let's try it your way. Let's try to pants a novel." So we did that. We wrote a book called Coast to Coast Murders. I would write a chapter and paint him into some kind of crazy, impossible scenario, thinking
Mm-hmm.
there's no way he's going to get out of this. And then 15 minutes later, he'd send me new chapters, and not only did he get out of it, but he put me into something even worse. And we just kind of
Mm-hmm.
went back and forth that way and wrote this book. But then, at the end of the process, there was a lot of editing, a lot of cleanup that had to happen. And I think we
Mm-hmm.
ended up around 160,000 words. We probably took 40,000 out. So there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
work on that front. And to his credit, he said, "Okay, we tried it your way. Let's try it my way. Here's an outline for a book called The Noise." And we wrote that book based on his outline. And I
Mm-hmm.
saw how much faster and easier that structure was. And when I was able to take a step back and just kind of look at it, I live on a little island off the coast of New England and called Newcastle. And I
Mm-hmm.
do a lap around the island every day when I finish the workday. And I basically use that time to figure out what comes next in the story when I'm pantsing a novel. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
finished my writing for the day, I go off for that run, I think about, okay, what comes next? What am I going to write tomorrow? When I've got an outline in front of me, I can use that same time to figure out, like how do I make what comes next better? Because I already know
Mm-hmm.
what comes next. So I'm able to take that structure and fine tune the structure. So yeah, structure is extremely important. I thought I would convince Patterson to become a pantser, and he convinced me to become an outliner.
I love that story. So yeah, it's funny. I've written a couple of books, and I pants my first book, and I mean, I could see like some major plot holes that I didn't close up. And actually, now the way that I use AI is I have it scan my manuscripts and tell me where there is possible plot holes that I may be missing. Of course, I have trained my ChatGPT, and I use my own custom GPTs that I have trained on story structure. So they are really good at story structure. It's not just ChatGPT Rogue, right? And I think that's one of the valuable use cases for the use of AI in creative writing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's both good and bad when it comes to AI. I use it for exactly what you just mentioned. I prefer Claude just because that's a platform that I just like. I don't know if it's one that's
Yeah.
is better than the other, but I will drop a whole story in there, a whole outline in there, and I've got a specific prompt that I've fine tuned that basically looks for plot holes, unfinished threads, anything that just doesn't make sense. It'll spit that list out to me in 15, 20 seconds, and then I can go through and I can clean it up. I think for something like that, it's fantastic. Where I have a problem with it is some authors try to use it for the actual writing process or brainstorming. And if you think about the way AIs were trained, like they were trained on the books written by other people. So it's almost like talking to an encyclopedia or a piece of cardboard. It can only quote what it's already been told. It's not capable of a creative thought. So if you tell it, here's my current scene, what comes next? Like it's going to tell you something, but it's going to tell you something that it saw in somebody else's book, which means it's not going to be surprising. It's not going to have that twist factor to it. Writing books with somebody like James Patterson, we're regularly on the phone brainstorming ideas. And, if I were to pose that same question to him, he's going to come up with something completely out of left field that nobody has ever thought of. It's going to be so weird and unique that, the reader will drop their book and have to pick it back up and get back into the story. It creates that jaw-dropping moment. That's something that AI can't do yet. I think that day is coming. I think sooner or later AI is going to have a conscious thought, it's going to have a creative thought, and it's going to be able to do that. But that day is not here yet. So like for me, it's a fantastic tool when it comes to stuff like what we just talked about, analyzing an outline, analyzing a story, creating ad copy. It's very good at creating like the back of book blurb. To me, the hardest thing to do, like I can write a novel easier than I can write that 200 words to describe what that novel is about. It's very good at coming up with titles, things like that. So you have to pick and choose your battles.
Yeah. Let me just correct something that you said for the audience, because I want to be really clear. That is not how large language models work. Okay. It is true that they were trained on a bunch of books, a bunch of blogs, a bunch of stuff that, under the law of fair use, which is, hey, you can use copyrighted materials to train or to train people or to train whatever, but you can't make money off it. And they went and made money off it because ChatGPT is going to be making $3 billion this year in year 3 of inception. And they have 800 million weekly active users. So of course they violated the law of fair use, and those authors did not get paid. Okay. Now, the one thing that I do want to correct, JD, and I am a technologist, and I'm sorry to push back on this. Large language models are not a data repository. They are not going to remember word for word anything that they were trained on. Okay. So the way that it works is like a giant robot librarian that read a bunch of books and it learned how to talk language that way. So if you ask it something, it's going to put something together that is original for you based on what you asked it. It is never going to pull something from somebody else's book. So I just want to, and this is a common misconception, and you are an authority, right? So I just wanted to make sure that we clear that up from the technology perspective, because it is not a data repository.
I understand that's what we've been told, but these various AIs will quote portions of my actual books back to me. Like
Yeah,
I've got
well,
the list of books
you
that
asked it to do that, though. Did you ask it to do that?
because it was trained on those books, and it was trained on them without anybody's permission. So
Right.
this is
No, and I
obviously
understand.
it's in court. A lot of people are debating it. It's not something I think that we're going to figure out. But it knows who I am. It knows my books. It will quote word for word sections of my books if I ask it to.
If
So
you
that
ask
data,
it to. if you ask it
Right,
to. Yeah.
which means it can rely on that same data for for other things. It was never given permission to scan my books or anybody else's books, which is to me the real problem here. I think a lot of authors would
Yeah.
have raised their hand and they said, "I'm absolutely fine with this. Go ahead and do it." Other ones wouldn't have. I personally would not have allowed it to do it.
Yeah.
But that's 50% on on each side of that equation. I think the real problem here is they did it without asking.
Yeah, no, they did violate the law of fair use, 100%. And a lot of, I call that the original sin. And, it happened. There's nothing we can do about it. There's a bunch of lawsuits going on. Authors are getting settled out of court. And then now publishers are opting in. I'm sure that when you sign a contract, there's an opt-in clause now. Hey, have you seen those clauses in any of the contracts that you're signing for your new books? Like you want to opt in for 3 years to let large language models train on your work for an extra $2,500. Have you seen those yet?
Oh, I'm in a weird situation because I actually have my own imprint with Simon and Schuster, so I have my own publishing house. But
Okay.
I've had heard of those being in like new contracts. My
Okay.
contracts don't have anything related to AI. There is some ambiguous language which could be construed as permission, if it's twisted the right way. But nowadays, from what I've been told, they are putting that particular thing in there, and they're asking authors if they want to do it. You have to be careful with that because your rights in general, like if you give up rights even to like a special edition, like that could be a lot of money out of your pocket. You could give up rights to an audiobook, a format that hasn't been created yet. Like right now we've got ebooks, we've got audiobooks, but I've got friends that have been in the business before either of those things existed, and because of language that was in their contract, the publisher was either allowed or not allowed to create them without compensating them. So you've got to be very careful at, particularly in today's world, what you're signing. And the ironic thing is you could take that contract and you could dump it into AI and you could say, what clauses do I need to be wary of before I sign this? And it will probably point out that particular clause to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's another great use case. So let's talk a little bit about the copyright law because I think, and I love this conversation because, like I said, you are basically an authority, right, when it comes to writing and being a full-blown novelist with a very successful career. By the way, how do your parents feel about that now?
A little bit better. I think my mom is still a little bit skeptical, but she sees that it's working out.
Yeah.
The copyright thing is kind of a weird problem too, because like I'm in 150 different countries, I've 24, 25 different languages, something like that. The copyright law is different everywhere.
Yeah. When it comes to the use of AI, you mean?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then a lot
it
of it
is.
is still working. It's working its way through the courts in all these different places. So like we don't even know what the final outcome is going to be. The way the law is structured in the U.S. at this point is AI generated content is not copyrightable.
Not copyrightable, not yours.
Right. Yeah. So
That's
so if you've
correct.
got a book and you write half of it, ChatGPT is throwing a couple of sentences in there. Even if you're editing them, there's a good chance that it's probably going to be flagged. And that's problematic. And the problem that you're going to really run into is not that it's got AI content in there, it's that everybody is shying away from it because from a publishing standpoint, nobody knows how all this stuff is going to shake out. So a publisher in a foreign country or even here in the US, they may be hesitant to put out your book if it has AI content in it because they don't know if they're going to be able to keep that book on the shelf in 2 years when the Supreme Court eventually rules on it.
Exactly.
So they're basically asking that question straight off. Is there any AI generated content in this book? And if there is, unfortunately, that is a red flag to them. So I go out of my way just to make sure that there isn't anything. And there's systems out there you can dump it into. I find it funny because you're asking the AI, is there AI content? So you're almost asking ChatGPT, did you write this? So I guess it's capable of telling you that. But for the most part, like if I drop in something that I wrote into one of those, it'll come back as like 2% or 3% AI generated. If I drop something in that actually has AI content on any level, it comes back at like 60, 70, 80%. So there's
Yeah, and
there's
you're
an obvious
actually,
difference.
are you using Claude to ask these questions?
For the most part, I use Claude. I use Notebook LM for the bigger stuff because Claude, I haven't played with projects yet, but Claude, as a normal chat, you can't drop like an entire novel in there. It can't handle that much data.
Oh, really?
Notebook LM can.
ChatGPT can, by the way.
Yeah, I've heard that. And
Uh-huh.
and it's good at certain things. I just Claude is the one that I just kind of started using at the
Yeah.
very beginning, and I've just sort of stuck with it. I think everybody's
Hmm.
kind of got their favorites.
Yeah.
But Notebook LM seems to go through an entire novel very quickly. It'll
Hmm.
create a punch list of potential problems, which is nice.
Hmm.
It'll
Hmm.
find little things. If you've got a character that you give blue eyes to on page 200, and then you say green eyes, 200 pages later, like it'll find that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And it,
Yeah.
it might get found through the normal editing process, with humans going through it too. But
Hmm.
to me, I just see it as another check layer.
So, one of my favorite uses. Let's wrap up on the copyright law, and I want to talk about a couple of other use cases for AI. Um, and the copyright law in the U.S. is the most strict copyright law with regards to the use of AI. Okay, we have the strictest laws worldwide. Okay, and that stipulates exactly what you said, which is you can use AI. It actually says you can use AI to brainstorm ideas, but you can't use AI to write your book. Okay, so and a lot of
I'm
people
sorry. Let
say
me let me correct you there, because
yes.
what actually says is you can't copyright AI generated text. So if you've got a paragraph of text, and you wrote the first two sentences and AI wrote the second two sentences, or even words in between there, you can copyright your text, but you can't
Yeah,
copyright the text generated by
I
the
know that's a
AI.
nightmare,
With,
right?
yeah,
That's a
yeah. I mean,
nightmare. Like, how do you
it's
even keep
literally, it's
track of that,
impossible. It's
right? It's
impossible to
impossible.
do it.
It's
But
impossible. And it does say that. You're 100% right. And this is what I always tell my students, right? Like I got a lot of, or people that reach out I mean, I talk about AI assist a lot, and I'm very confident speaking about the subject because I understand the technology very well. And I also understand the copyright law very well. And I also understand the Authors Guild guidance very well. And I also understand craft very well. Right. So I feel like I can speak to this subject really, at a different level with you. Right. Also, now, the copyright law says exactly that, and a lot of people come to me and say, "Well, you know what, Anna? I generated a draft with ChatGPT, and now I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to edit the draft." And then I would tell them, "Well, which parts did ChatGPT write?" And they're like, "Well, I've done so many edits now, I don't remember what ChatGPT wrote and what I wrote." And it's like, that is such a dangerous game. That is such a dangerous game because you're right. They owed what, 50% of the book? Like, who owns
well,
that book?
unfortunately, what's going to end up happening is, let's say they try to take that to a traditional publisher. That traditional
Uh-huh.
publisher is going to drop it into one of those tools that says,
Yeah.
that basically
Like
tells you what
originality
the AI
AI.
used.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it's going to come back at some high percentage. So even if the author
Yes.
is telling them the truth, or telling them that they rewrote 90% of it or whatever, the fact that it's
Mm-hmm.
coming back as anything, they're going to see as a potential problem, and they're going to back away slowly because they don't know what the risk of having that problem on their, their chart is. They won't risk it at this point. And that's
Yeah.
a worldwide problem.
It is a
It's
worldwide problem. Yeah. Yeah. So I am not a fan of that approach at all, even though the copyright law, kind of has that. Well, if you own what you wrote. And I think that a lot of aspiring writers are really taking too much liberty with that, and they're going to end up in a big mess. The way that I like to use AI, generative AI, is exactly how we have been discussing, which is, for example, if I develop my entire story Bible, I develop all my subplots, I develop my the summary of my novel. I am a big plotter, by the way. I'm not a pantser anymore because I saw the light, and I became a plotter. So and then I have a loose outline and I start working with ChatGPT, or actually, I like to work with my own custom GPT tools because I've trained them on Storycraft, like I've mentioned. So I have a great tool. Her name is Olivia, and she's an outline and plot strategist, and she will look at my outline, and she will say, you are missing, there's not enough tension here. There's, this is not landing. You need another beat here that does this. And she may even suggest to me ideas of things that I can potentially develop, but they're just one sentence ideas. Like maybe the father should be smoking a cigarette with his daughter after the big fight outside, because then that would drive this and that and the other. And I may not take that idea. I may use a different idea. I still need to go and write that chapter myself. I am never going to tell AI, hey, can you now develop this chapter for me? Which is what a lot of people end up doing. And that is such a slippery slope.
Well, that's yeah, and you just hit the nail on the head. It's a slippery slope, So you use it for this one little thing, and all of a sudden you're using it for two things, and then you're using it for five things. And frankly, if the AI is helping you brainstorm, now all of a sudden you're not brainstorming anymore. So you're turning off that section of your brain. You're not training that tool anymore, which means that tool is going to get weaker. It's not going to be as sharp as it was before. I'm old school. Like I'm one of those people where I can sit down with a notepad and a pen, and I can write down, and I can write in a novel. And I get that not everybody wants to do that. Some people want to, get there in different ways, but I take pride in the fact that I can do that. I think the novels are that much better for it. The fact that I'm capable of doing that brainstorm activity on my own without an assist.
Okay.
Like we said at the beginning, you're either an author or you're a prompt engineer. I think it's one or the other.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I particularly agree with that statement. Well, I'm sorry. I do agree with that statement. You're 100% right. You're either a prompt engineer or you're an author. But what I find super interesting, JD, is, I have pushed these models to the limit. And this idea that AI is actually making your creativity weaker versus stronger, I'm going to push back on that, because I'm going to give you a use case example. Okay. So let's say that you are, JD Barker with an incredible career, right? And so much craft knowledge. I mean, you have written so many books, you know how to create conflict, you know how to create tension, right? So let's say that, let me ask you this question. Is there a novel structure that you have ever wanted to write that you haven't yet written? For example, one of the things that I want to write one day in my life is a book in second person, right? Like Bright Lights, Big City. I thought that was such a great, done in second person. And that's one of my things that I want to do one day. Is there any kind of novel structure that you would like to write that you have never written before?
I don't think so. I mean, I've actually done second person. I've done third. I've done first. Present, past tense. I kind of mix it up, but that's partly because of the training that I've had. I've had novels literally handed to me, that are written in third person, and I would rewrite them in first person present tense from third person past tense. So I've been there, done that so many times that I feel like that skill set is just it's just part of my toolbox.
Okay, so. The point that I'm trying to drive here is I want to place a subject matter expert like you with a tool that can allow you to think deeper. So, for example, have you ever written a novel with a dual timeline?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So have you ever, is there anything that you think that you have never written that you would like to try to write? Or do you feel like you have just written in every structure that you can possibly write?
I think I've hit all the ones, because I focus primarily on mass market bestsellers. I've tackled every format that's been used for that. I'm writing books in multiple formats right now. Like you can't really see it, but there's a typewriter behind me. I write a sentence on that book every day with a typewriter. I've got another book that I'm writing longhand on a notepad. And I've got my primary book I'm writing in Scrivener. Each one of those has a different voice because I'm using a different medium.
Oh, that's so cool.
For me personally, I like that experience. So like you mentioned Bright Lights, Big City. When I wanted to write something in second person, today it's still the go-to for that.
Yeah.
So I read that book and I studied it. I went through it with a highlighter. I dog-eared a bunch of pages and that's how I learned.
That's the best teacher, reading.
Yeah.
I agree.
I know I could take, right now I could take something, my current work in progress. I could drop it into Claude and say, rewrite this in second person for me. And it would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I prefer to do that on my own, to have that knowledge base in my own head rather than using a third party tool to do it for me.
Yeah,
Mainly just because I
of
want
course.
that skill set. Like
Well, you want
I
to
mentioned,
understand the craft. Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
published my first novel at
Mm-hmm.
43 years old. I had
Mm-hmm.
20 years of publishing experience in front of that, where I was working behind the scenes. If I had started publishing books back in my 20s, without that experience behind me, I don't think my books would be hitting as hard as they are today. That
Mm-hmm.
learning curve is what got me to where I am today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's shortcuts, there's things I could do. Even back then, there were things I could do to
Mm-hmm.
get around that and possibly save some time.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the fact that I built that writer muscle. Like it's gotten stronger over the years because I've
Yeah.
taken on the hard tasks and I've learned how to do them.
Well, I think, I think you're talking about craft, and I think that, we touched on that, right? Like, just because you know how to prompt an AI doesn't mean you understand craft. And the best teacher for craft, I always say this, is reading a lot of books and doing exactly what you did. That is the best teacher for craft. So I, you know, so I always say that this is really the new golden age of literature that we are in. And, JD, you are at an unfair advantage because of all your experience and everything that you have been through. And I mean, writing for you is like really second nature. You understand all the structures and whatever. But let's say that you were developing a dual timeline novel that had historical fiction elements in one timeline, and in the other timeline it had, it was present, right? And these two timelines had to interconnect through something like, timelines do. And you develop sort of like your outline, right? And then do you see any benefit? And then asking Claude, like, hey, what are some inconsistencies in this outline? And do you think that that output is actually making you think deeper?
I am totally fine with throwing it into one of the AIs to ask those questions. Where I would have a
Yeah.
problem with it is if you're throwing the ideas into the AI and asking it to create the format for you, or
Oh,
helping telling you to structure the book. Like, this is what I would like to do. Here's the pieces that I have. Put this together for me. Because it will do that, but the problem is because of the way it was trained, the way that it works, it's going to have to rely on what it was taught in order to do that, which means it's going to rely on some other somebody else's book, some multiple books. It's going to pull from that knowledge base in order to piece it together. It's not creative. It's not capable of doing something creative. Only your
okay.
brain can do that today.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit on that because it is not a data repository, but it's not. It does have a lot of knowledge. I mean, for example, I can ask. I was actually working on this the other day. I asked. I want to write this novel, or I was working with a student, and she wants to write this novel. It's got like 15 different. It's a character ensemble novel. Okay, so she's got like 8 characters that are all going to have interconnected roles, right? Which is a very complex structure to write, and again, this was my story trained architect that I use in ChatGPT. It was really very helpful in defining the structure for the student. Like, you know what? She kept calling it, the student kept calling it, this is going to be a book that I want to outline that is going to be based on vignettes, right? And that was actually the wrong term. And, the AI pushed back and said, what you are writing here is more in the style of interconnected stories, and that's not called vignettes. And you're going to actually structure this novel incorrectly if you keep thinking about it that way. I mean, that was great feedback from an AI. Don't you agree?
That absolutely is. But at the same time, like, is this person like I'm looking at this as a book doctor, ghostwriter? I'm putting that hat back on. And when I hear a story like that, my first thought is this person capable of writing this? What have they written before to get to this point? Because they're basically jumping in.
It's very tough to write, huh?
They're jumping in the deep end of the pool when they haven't swam in the shallow end yet. And if
Yes,
that can be done.
I agree.
But to me, like using the AI to help you in a lot of ways, it's a crutch. I think there's a learning curve involved in that. They need to evolve to the point to be able to write something like that. Not take a shortcut.
And I think that, well, I don't here's what this is why I say that we have entered the new golden age of literature, because what we can, this writer has written 4 books before, and they have been cozy mysteries, just very brain candy books. And now she has this very ambitious structure that she wants to write. Okay. And she will be able to find all the inconsistencies in her outline with AI, and she will be able to execute that structure, okay, which would have probably been impossible or very difficult to do. She would have another 10 years in front of her of trying to figure out how to really do this in a craft way that makes sense. Like, Leanne Moriarty is a master at doing that, right? She's written books like Here One Moment and Six Perfect Strangers, which is also, always an ensemble of characters that have all this interconnected conflict. And people will be able to start structuring novels in a very smart way now with these AI tools. And I know that we're getting sort of like to the end here. But that is one of the use cases that I see. They still have to write the novel. They cannot absolutely not generate any chapters with the novel, but they could use, I'm sorry, I keep saying the wrong words. They cannot generate any chapters with the AI, but they can definitely use it as an analytical tool that works really well. And, I think that you did say that that was one of the good use cases for AI.
I think it absolutely is.
Okay.
But at the same time, it makes me sad that that person isn't learning how to do that, with a pen and paper and, and nothing else.
Yeah.
Because I do know other authors that could write that novel, but they've got 30 years of experience to get there.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things.
Yeah.
Obviously the world is changing. Some people
Yeah.
are totally okay with this. For me, like I enjoy writing. I would be writing for free today if people weren't paying me for it.
Yeah.
And part of that is the experience. It's the learning. It's learning how to do something like that. That I might not have been able to do 5 years ago.
Yeah. And I think that, now, you'll learn with these AI tools, because the AI tools will be able to teach you like they are teaching this particular person on that structure that she needs, that very ambitious structure. But anyways, JD, I know that we only have a few minutes left, and it's been a really awesome conversation with you. And I love that you push back. I love that I push back. I love that we have, perspectives on, things. I think that really we are on the same side of the of AI here. At the end of the day, I am very against AI generating any kind of prose or books or anything, right? Like, that is not how to use AI, and it's not copyrightable. And even co-writing 50% of the book, no, don't do that, right? So I think we are very much on the same side here. Now, I will. I want to ask you. People aspire to have the life that you have. Okay. You are a full-time writer. You are a best-selling author. You have worked on amazing projects. You live on an island. Is it, how do you feel every day? Do you feel happiness, like that you have achieved this dream that so many aspire? Like,
Absolutely. But there was a lot of hard work to get here.
yeah.
I did publish my first novel though 11 years ago under my own name. The day before that, I had 0 people on the mailing list. I had 0 fans. I had sold 0 books. So a lot has changed over a decade. But that's, to me, it's attributed to a lot of, really hard work. I'm a perfectionist. I don't let anybody see a book until I feel it's as good as it could possibly be. There's, and I carry that through on everything from marketing to the business side to, everything that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think it's important that you do that. In today's world, there's, roughly 1 million books published every year. Yours might be one of them. Somehow you've got to stand out in that crowd. I think in order to do that, you have to start by writing a 5-star book. I think that's a given. Like you can't write a 3.5-star book. You're going to disappear. Because the one thing that I have learned over the years is, you can buy as many Facebook and Amazon ads as you want. You can drive a title up, those charts, but the second you pull back on that, it typically ends up dropping again, unless you've got word of mouth. The book has to be good enough, where somebody puts it down, they finish it, and they tell 3 of their friends about it. And that's the only thing that really gets you over that hurdle and gets you on the bestseller list over and over again.
Wow, that is great advice. That is great advice. Well, JD, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. And I mean, if you don't know who JD Barker is, please go check out his website and his books. And he's done so much great work. And are you currently working on a project now, or how many books a year do you write?
You don't want to know.
Oh my gosh.
Working with James Patterson, he's kind of got me on the co-author bug. So I started my own imprint with Simon and Schuster. I've got 12 different books right now that I'm working on with other people along with my own solo titles. So it's keeping me busy.
Wow.
I'm having a lot of fun with it.
So are you're co-writing with other people? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I basically do is I find people that, I'll read something that they wrote, and they're very good, but they've got, one little problem or 2 little problems, things that I've fixed before as a book doctor that I know I can help them resolve. So those are the people that I bring in as a co-author, and then I walk them through the entire process from creating the idea to creating the outline and actually writing the book, my total editing process, and get it to the point where, it's going to come out. But I basically teach, them, the parts that they're missing. Like I mentioned early on, like a lot of indie authors, because they're not told, they've got this particular problem. It could be something really simple, but they're not fixing it. And because of that, every one of their books kind of hit a certain ceiling when they put it out. They just never get past that particular hurdle. And I'm finding that with, if I find the right person and I train them, I get that problem and I work it out of their writing, then it takes them to the next level of their career. So I'm kind of looking for people where I can do that.
So this is a service that you provide?
Well, initially I used to work as a mentor, and I charged for that, which I felt icky about. I never liked to charge people, but it was a good gatekeeper. I got rid of the people who weren't serious, but then I ended up flipping the whole model on its head, and now I just bring these people in as co-authors. So I walk them through this entire process. They do a lot of the heavy lifting, but I'm teaching them, how to do it. So when they write their next book, they've got that skill set behind them. And then when the book comes out, it comes out through Simon and Schuster, 150 different countries, which is very,
through your
very good for them
imprint?
as an author.
Through your imprint?
Yeah, so then they come out with their next book, and then maybe they query an agent. That agent is going to search them, or they're going to see this track record behind them. They've got books in Spanish, they've got books in Bulgarian and Russian, all these different languages. So that gives them a huge leg up when they come out with their next book. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you basically are doing this for talent that you see, and you don't charge anymore. This is just sort of something that you're doing.
I just do it to bring them in as a co-author. I enjoy it. It helps me recharge my batteries to help people.
That's so awesome. I love reading other people's work and making suggestions too. I love doing that. Like, just craft geeks is what I say that we are when we do stuff like that. So is there a way that, like, how do you find these people? And I'm just wondering, like, do you have like a program that they have to like apply to, or you just find them randomly?
They've all kind of come into, like I was just at Author Nation. I met a lot of fantastic people. A couple of them emailed me and told me they were interested in it. So I have them send a writing sample, see if they've got that one, if it's something that I could work with. A lot of times I'll edit that writing sample and I'll be really critical, send it back to them and say, okay, this is what you need to do to fix it and make it right. And then, if they do that, if they're able to do it and get it to the to the next level, then then we talk about possibly working on a book together. There's tons of authors out there that are fantastic. They're really good, but they don't necessarily get the training that they need in order to really succeed. And those are the people I'm looking for.
JD, that is so generous of you. That is very, very generous of you. Thank you for doing that for folks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, my friend, is there anything that you want the listeners to know about you, or before we jump off, or just your website is
Yeah, it's pretty. I'm at jdbarker.com. All the social media is at jdbarker. The books can be found pretty much everywhere.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Until next time, writer, keep on writing.